Welcome to Citizens Forum. I'm your host, Walter McGinnis. Today we have with us Alan Castles. Alan is a Victoria author and pharmaceutical policy researcher. He has written 4 books on the medicinal screening and pharmaceutical industry, including the latest, the Cochrane collaboration, Medicine's Best Secret. So Alan's come in today. We're going to be talking about the fentanyl crisis and basically the issues all around drug policy in British Columbia and look at several of the problems. So, welcome to the show, Alan.
Thanks.
And
Good to be back.
now, okay, I don't know where we really want to start here, but I think if we say, for instance, we're looking at election coming up here in the next few weeks. Mm-hmm. We're trying to pick between the parties. What party might have a little better drug policy than others. But firstly, let's look at the Liberals' association with the pharmaceutical industry and how that might be detrimental to democracy.
Yeah. Well, it's a very good issue. You know, the Liberals have been attacked repeatedly for having far too much influence from companies, oil and gas, pipelines, etc. And you know, you see the same sort of thing when it comes to pharmaceutical policy, where the people whose job it is to sell drugs have a lot of contact to the Ministry of Health. Lobbyists are registered at the legislature. They visit ministers and MLAs all the time, really basically making their case for their drugs. You might say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that at the end of the day, when it comes to decisions about what we pay for and what we don't pay for, you want those decisions based on the best evidence.
Yeah.
And what's best for the citizenry, not necessarily on who spoke to the minister last week or who went to a fundraiser, and next thing you know, a new drug is being covered by the ministry with taxpayers' dollars. So we see this in a number of instances, and one of the ones that I wrote about recently had to do with the HPV vaccine. So this is a vaccine for cervical cancer, but they're now promoting it for boys. You might say, well, how can a vaccine for cervical cancer help boys? Well, you know, there has been some trials that males can carry this virus, and hence maybe we should perhaps stop it in boys as well. You know, I see that as a clear example of the influence of lobbyists and the pharmaceutical manufacturers on the government to make a decision that costs several $1 million a year for a vaccine that's highly controversial and not proven to really do anything to advance the health of boys. And of course, we're paying for it. So, I mean, that's an example where
It's sort of like a solution looking for, or a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
When they have a drug, what can we?
Yeah, they have in this case, they have a vaccine and they want to use it and they want boys to be using it. You know, and this vaccine, so controversial. Other countries, Japan, for example, have taken it out of the system. They don't even want that vaccine being used in girls. You've got groups around the world in places like France and Spain and Denmark that have had a fairly high level of adverse reactions to this drug. So girls are being hurt by being vaccinated with this drug at some level. And of course, we go ahead and pay for it here in BC.
What sort of adverse effects might you be seeing?
Well, they're rare, and of course, we can't say that they are caused by the vaccine, but they're associated with the vaccine. So hypotension, fainting, and some girls have had much more serious, longer-term consequences of this vaccine. And if you Googled HPV vaccine adverse effects, you would find a sea of problems that are associated with this vaccine.
So in British Columbia, you're going to the Ministry of Health and you think you got a good drug or a good vaccine for something. What is the process? How do they decide?
Yeah, well, let me just contrast what the process used to be. We're talking about politics here. 20 years ago, when I started researching pharmaceutical policy, the NDP were in power, and they employed the Therapeutics Initiative, which was a group at UBC, an independent group established to help look at the safety and efficacy of new drugs and advise the government which are reasonable drugs to pay for and which ones are low value and maybe they shouldn't be paying for. That advice was absolutely golden because it was independent. Back then, the NDP had a policy of not talking to the pharmaceutical companies. They wouldn't allow the staff of the Ministry of Health to actually meet with the manufacturers. That's exactly what you want. You don't want the salespeople to be in the face of the bureaucrats who are making decisions. You want independent experts, and that's what the NDP did. Well, when the Liberals came into power, we saw that that regime changed almost overnight. They created a task force. They tried to get rid of the Therapeutics Initiative. They cut their funding. They started meetings with lobbyists and with the manufacturers' representatives. It was an open door. You know, if you have a drug to sell, come into BC and talk to us. You know, that kind of thing most people don't know about, and I think it really makes a huge effect on the kinds of treatments we end up paying for, and the kinds of drugs and vaccines that BC citizens get.
Now, the Therapeutics Initiative, is that run through University of British Columbia?
That's right.
Okay, so now, would they, it seems to me, they probably would save the taxpayers' money over time, wouldn't they?
See, that's the curious thing. You've got a government that appears to be sort of fiscally conservative, yet they're wasting money on newer drugs that aren't any better, sometimes not any better or any more effective than existing treatments. Why are they paying for those drugs? Why are they covering them? Well, it's the perhaps you should look closely at who are the funders of the Liberal Party. Who's giving donations? Who's going to the $1,000 or $5,000 a plate dinners with the Premier? You know, it's not just the oil and gas industry. It's not just the pipeline folks. It's also the pharmaceutical industry. And I think that, you know, at the end of the day, we want our decisions around drugs to be based on good quality science, not on a sales talk.
Yeah, it certainly makes me uneasy.
Yes.
No, and most people, we're not down at the legislature knocking on doors with our pet projects, and like we would never have a chance to get to talk to anybody.
And you know, and I've met with the health minister before, and I've met with people at the Ministry of Health. They're very nice people. They're very, you know, open. But at the same time, by allowing the influence of the industry into decision making, I mean, that's what the pharmaceutical manufacturers want. They don't really care about advertising so much to the patient or even advertising to the doctor. If they can get the regulator, in this case, they can get the BC Ministry of Health to cover a particular drug, they've hit the gold mine.
Yeah, you remember back with that huge controversy about the fired healthcare workers.
That's right.
And the mysterious death of a researcher.
Yeah.
There seemed to be something happening in the background there when the Liberal government seemingly didn't want to dig too deeply, let's say, into that issue, and they seem to have glossed over the reasons why those firings occurred.
That was the biggest, probably, biggest bureaucratic scandal we've ever seen in British Columbia.
Yeah.
When is the last time there's been one or two ministry employees fired? But you know, having 8 of them fired at the same time, you know, we don't really know what's at the bottom of it, and we don't know who called this in. But we can hypothesize on whose interests are they serving by getting rid of people that are doing drug safety studies.
Yeah, I remember they were doing smoking cessation drugs.
For example, they were studying those treatments. Of course, those treatments made by a major manufacturer, and the manufacturer, of course, does not want independent research about the safety of their drugs, because it's quite likely.
That's right. And in the era of the internet, and somebody's looking at a drug, you're looking at the label, and you can go to your keyboard and just put the name of the drug in and put problems, and you can get pages.
Yeah.
And I think, wouldn't you think if, say, even in a small province in Canada, and you know, we're not a big population, but if a negative study would come out here, or a negative review, do you think that could have worldwide ripples?
Absolutely. And in fact, a lot of the research that we've looked at has been done overseas, and the smoking cessation might be a great example, where the day that, or the week that Christy Clark announced that this new drug, Champix, was going to be part of BC's smoking cessation policy, and there was a press conference and there was lots of excitement, that same week the French government took that drug off the formulary because of the safety concerns. Psychiatric problems, people being injured by that treatment. I mean, smoking, while bad, is not a disease. So what you want is a treatment that will help people stop smoking, but also not make them crazy.
Yeah.
And you know, so we have to look at independent information worldwide in order to make decisions, and we have to generate it ourselves here in BC.
So rarely do you see true independent third-party analysis of if anything,
Right.
let alone a drug.
Right.
So often, like as I said before, drugs come up. They have a drug designed maybe to help with somebody with diabetes, and all of a sudden, it's being sold as for high blood pressure or for sleeping or something, and you go like, well, how did that happen?
See, I mean, this is the kind of thing that I've studied, and it's all about market expansion, right? So you can get a drug approved, say, for high blood pressure, but then they say, oh, it's also useful for this condition or that condition, and they start marketing in that way. So a drug that might be marginally useful for one thing ends up getting used for all kinds of things.
Yeah.
You know, we spend something like public dollars, about $1.5 billion in BC every year on pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
That's a huge amount of money that if we were able to even shave off a small percentage of savings, you
Yeah.
could fund the independent research you need. You could, make drugs more available for people who are on low income and
Yeah.
so on. You could actually save money by not sending more of it to the pharmaceutical companies and use that for things that we
Yeah.
really need.
Well, I've always been a harsh critic of the NDP. I've always held them up. I wanted a little better from them because they were from a social democratic background, which is supposed to be looking out after the people and all that. What do you think? Do you think there's a chance if the NDP were to reform the provincial government, would they actually go back to some of the ways they had and were being more strict about how and what happens?
Absolutely. I think the NDP very much remembers that they started the Therapeutics Initiative. They started this culture of evidence-based health policy making,
Yeah.
certainly when it comes to pharmaceuticals, and they've advanced that. They've generated research. The ministry used to invest in a lot of this kind of independent research. And under the NDP, at least we saw that there was a concern about the lobbyists,
Yeah.
concern about the adverse influences on drug policy making,
Yeah.
and tried to reduce those. And that's exactly what you need. I sound like a broken record, but
No, I mean people should be thinking in those terms.
yeah, if you think there's a new drug on the market, the government's paying for it, you might think, well, it's a good thing. Well, maybe not. Maybe if you had an independent advisor telling you about the qualities of these drugs, you might say that, oh yeah, it's as good as other drugs, but it's twice as expensive. So what value is that in spending money on drugs that are equally effective of what we got, but twice as much money? So.
Well, I grew up in a small village, and we had one doctor in the village, and his usually he would say, take 2 aspirins and call me tomorrow. And it'd be so surprising, half of the problems that would disappear overnight, and I think he would knew that. And I think a lot of medicine should be more practiced that way. So time goes by so quickly, Alan.
Yeah.
We only touched on that very narrow area, but hopefully we can have you back during the real election cycle.
Yeah.
And really start digging down a little deeper into some of these other drug issues, because these are the things that are really affect everybody's lives every day.
Yeah.
And if there's a chance that we can affect that by getting a better government, I think it's a good idea.
And I would add that in a comparison between the NDP policy and the Liberal policy, the NDP runs a much tighter ship
Yeah.
when it comes to pharmaceutical policy. And for that reason, I think people should consider them.
When you come back, and we'll talk a little bit about the Greens.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming in today, Alan. And that concludes the first segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back to Citizens Forum. Our second guest today is Dr. Trevor Hancock. Dr. Hancock is a professor and a senior scholar at the University of Victoria School of Public Health and Social Policy. And we've had Trevor on several times talking about a number of issues. But today we're going to be looking at the nature and the role of government. We never really back up enough to really get to trying to figure out what we're really looking for our government and what it should be doing for us. So welcome to the show, Trevor.
Thank you.
Now, today is the 15th of March, and Wednesday, the 15th of March, and you have an article on the op-ed page in the Times Colonist, and I ripped the title off it. I think it says "Towards a Better Framework of Well-Being."
BC framework for social well-being.
Social well-being. Now, when we're talking about the nature of government, and it seems like should we get back to that, and why are we even looking at that? It seems to be rolling along quite well. Nothing has changed in a long time. And in your article today, I read something that really struck me as help me put that perspective, give me that correct perspective of what I'm looking for in my government. And you said here, we're looking for a better approach in which the central purpose of government is human development rather than economic development. And what's the thinking behind that idea, and how did you come to that conclusion?
Well, I guess I came to it because I come out of medicine and out of public health, and so my focus has always been on people and the well-being of people. And so as I, as a public health professional, work in and with government, what I see a lot is that the focus of government is growing the economy. And it's as if the purpose of people is to support the economy, when it really should be the other way around. The purpose of the economy should be to support people. And so we've got that kind of ass backwards, and we end up making the wrong policy choices as a result.
Yeah, we can see the influence everywhere of the corporate influence on media and on education.
Yeah. Healthcare.
Healthcare. We see whenever we are looking for changes and want things that'll happen better for us, that you have the lobbyists and you have all sorts of influences in the media, for instance, if not outright corporate ownership, the influence of advertising and all that, that it almost seems that we can't ever get to discuss this issue at this level. We're always just kind of reading in the paper about one thing or another. The Dow Jones is up or down or something.
Well, and that's part of the problem. So what we navigate by and what seems to drive public policy is the Dow Jones or the GDP or how well the economy is or what unemployment is. Not that those are unimportant, but I just don't think they're the most important things. I think that if we measured our success in terms of human development, if we said that the sign of a good government and a good society is that people everywhere are reaching their full human potential, are living healthy and long lives, that's what we're really about.
Yeah. There's a number of issues you can touch on, I think, to show examples of that. On the way into the show today, I was listening to CBC. They were talking about the elections in the Netherlands this today, and they didn't opt for a more right-wing regime that was hard on immigration, and obviously with all the rest of the agenda, that they stayed more or less in this middle area of looking at issues and taking care of the public. And would you say that sort of a government does exist in the Netherlands, or is that just sort of some kind of a...
Well, in the Netherlands and even more so in Scandinavia, and I've spent a fair bit of time over the years in Sweden, and Norway, for example. In Norway, wealth is actually, and certainly the ostentatious display of wealth is kind of frowned upon.
Yeah.
It's a much more egalitarian society. So a part of it is that, but the other thing is that social development has a very strong part, plays a very strong role in government in those parts of the world. And so there, I think, to a much greater extent, you see an understanding that the economy supports what you need for people. And here, in this kind of Anglo-Saxon world, the US and the UK and Australia and Canada and so on, we're much more about growing the economy. I think we should be growing, if you like, people, or growing human development. It's very interesting, for example, if you look at public policy, a lot of the time you'll hear about economic impact assessment.
Yeah.
Sometimes environmental impact assessment. there's very little in the way of health impact assessment.
Yeah.
And so we end up, and even less in terms of social impact assessment. So we end up looking at public policy primarily through an economic lens and saying, is this public policy good or bad for the economy?
And I mean, it seems so short-sighted in many
Very.
ways. But say, in that economic model of never-ending growth, seemingly all other values are secondary. Whatever happens to the environment, it just seems to be a side effect. Sometimes they have to deal with it. Most times they just offload the effects onto the public and plow on with their agenda. But how would, say the government of British Columbia today or the government of Canada, do they look at education, which maybe you and I will agree on this, that although you spend some money on education, you're going to get a big reward at the other end. You're going to have an educated, trained...
Well, that's a perfect example, in fact. And if you only have to look at what happened to the teachers to understand that this government has always seen education as an unnecessary public expense instead of seeing it as a necessary public investment.
Yeah.
And so with a lot of those areas, health, social services, education, it's not that those are expenses that we can't afford. They are actually investments we can't afford not to make. When you invest in kids, you're investing in the future. And so that's a piece of what we have to turn around. The other thing is that if you only are interested in growing the economy, and if you're being guided by GDP, then it really doesn't matter what kind of investment you make in the economy.
Yeah.
And so selling tobacco is kind of fine because it adds to GDP. Cranking up the fossil fuel industry is fine because it adds to GDP.
Yeah.
But in both cases, the long-term harms of those industries are such that even though they contribute to GDP, they actually do harm to people and the environment. And so why would you
You're
do
probably
that?
aware of an article. It was it was in the TC about maybe a year ago, where they were talking about it was not necessarily the fentanyl crisis, but the crisis of drug addiction and people that are homeless in Victoria. And they did a calculation on this one person, and he cost the system, I don't know, like $100,000.
Yes, exactly.
And had they just supported that person, gave them some kind of subsidized housing, counseling, addiction services, it would have cost them maybe $20,000. So, and then the hard economics of it, regardless of if you cared about people or not, this still would save money. But it seems to me that in the model of the economic growth, the ambulance arriving, the paramedics trying to revive somebody, they take him to emergency ward, all that's increasing the GDP.
Exactly. I mean, that's the other thing about tobacco industry, for example. Not only that when you sell tobacco do you add to GDP, but when you then treat all of the illness that tobacco causes, that adds to GDP.
Yeah.
And then we use GDP to navigate. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. And so what we need to do is change what we measure if we want to change what we do.
Yeah. I always equate, this very obsessive approach to economics in this way of this constant growth, very narrow definitions of what's good for the economy, what isn't. I associate that to a fascist ideology, because it is so narrow, but it's not even in our interests. It's in nobody's interest, even if you didn't care about anybody else. If you just said, I'm a taxpayer, I don't want to pay taxes, I want to keep my own money, we should be doing all these things for that reason alone. I mean, we could use their model and say, okay,
yes, except I think there's some real problems with always casting people as taxpayers.
Yeah.
We're actually citizens. And part of being a citizen is contributing to the collective good. Whereas as a taxpayer, it's all about how do I save my personal money, and the hell with the common good.
Yeah, and I'm using that as an example.
But I think it's part of the problem that we fall
absolutely.
into as a society.
Yeah.
So we need to change the conversation.
Yeah.
and say, no, it's not about being a taxpayer and having to save your tax dollars. It's about being a citizen and how do you contribute to growing, if you like, a better society.
You know, and we're in full agreement on
Yeah.
that issue. You know, I've spent my life concerned about a lot of these issues. I've been very puzzled sometimes about how things go. You know, and you look at how governments govern, and things don't go well for people, and often they'll say this is a mistake, when all their actions look fairly deliberate to me. You know, I can't believe how come every time they make mistake, we always lose. And couldn't they make a mistake and we win on occasion? You know what I mean? If it was truly a mistake,
That's a
the
nice
odds
thought,
are
yeah.
pretty good that once in a while something better would happen. So, you know, I haven't seen much change in my life. You know, Bruce Cockburn wrote the song, "The Trouble with Normal is that it always gets worse." We think this is just the way it is, but in fact, we're losing ground.
Well, we are, and I think, I mean, I've done work as a futurist, and what we're on is the so-called business as usual
Yeah.
pathway, and the problem with business as usual, and we knew this 40 years ago or more. If you go back to 1972, an important publication called
Yeah.
The Limits to Growth, and The Limits to Growth said that if we continued with business as usual, then we would face economic and environmental decline or collapse in the mid-21st century. People have gone back recently and looked at were they right or wrong. They were pretty much on track in terms of their story. Business as usual takes us to a very dangerous place. We are going to have to change dramatically the path we're on. One of the things I'm involved in right now here in Victoria is trying to start the conversation about one planet living. So right now, as a community, we and as North Americans, we use the equivalent of 4 or 5 planets worth of resources every year, and we only have one planet.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to figure out how do we reduce our ecological footprint 70 or 80% to the equivalent of one planet's worth of need and demand, rather, while at the same time maintaining a high quality of life. And we're not even talking about that.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to start a conversation that says, how do we live with a one planet footprint in this region, but yet maintain a good quality of life?
You know, we're afraid. You know, everybody I know, we're getting by. I mean, I call us the working. You know, we're always worried and always afraid about not getting something. Not, you know, but if you look at our lifestyle and everything, it's not too bad, really.
It's very good.
But the fear is kind of given to us every day that something may happen, and we're always kept on edge. And I would really love to be able to have a life in which I might be able to do a little art, take a holiday someplace, be with my family more. And I think we're really in a place now where we're at it's almost like at a breaking point.
Yeah, well, I think we're approaching that, and I think that it's bound up in the idea that success is measured by how much you have and quantity, not in terms of quality. And we're going to have to make a switch as a culture and in our heads to say, no, it's not the size of the economy and the size of your house and the size of your car. It's the quality of the life that you have, and you don't have to have all of that big stuff, especially because if you're then trying to figure out how you pay for it and working too hard to pay for it and going into debt to pay for it, that's doesn't make a lot of sense, actually.
Especially when you would like to make better decisions about your purchasing. And I'm as guilty as the next person that I'm not looking for organic in every purchase. When I'm wanting to buy a vehicle or something, I probably could make better decisions. But, you know, in the end, we just seem to be so rushed in our lives, we're not having a chance to reflect. And I think that's the point that you've made here today, which is very good. So there you go. That's it for this week. I'm sure we're going to have you back again and talk more about this and many other issues. Thank you for coming in today,
Always
Dr.
a pleasure.
Hancock. So that wraps up this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back to Citizens Forum, and this is the Jack and Walt segment of the show, and welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you.
We'd like to bring in a few articles just to touch on many subjects that are happening in our community. So, what have you brought in today, Jack?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that, I mean, am I wrong if you sort of think that the world is getting absolutely crazier by the day? I mean, even here in Victoria, I mean, we're so protected in so many ways, but even here you see it happening, and you know, everywhere else in the world. Am I wrong, or do you agree?
Well, I'd say we seem to be lacking a lot of common sense. As my dad would always be saying, this is just common sense. Well, common sense is not that common anymore.
So, I mean, that's absolutely right. And here is an example of why. You know, I always talk about the media, and I always talk about democracy. So, this was in the Times Colonist on Sunday, March the 12th. It's a comment. It's a comment thing, you know, fairly extensive. And it says, worry less about terror. And in it, the guy says, a Triangle Center on Terrorism and Homeland Security study completed in January 2017, so it's very up to date, shows that since 9/11, 123 people in the United States have been killed by Muslim American extremists. 123 people. In the same period of time, more than 240,000 Americans were murdered by other means. So it's 123 versus 240,000. And yet look what the media has done to the people of America and Canada and Europe by focusing and focusing and focusing and completely leading us in the wrong direction until we are terrorized. And I'll bet if you look at those 123, I have no doubt that some of them are linked completely to the CIA, the FBI, the DIA, and all the other groups. So look how we are being just destroyed.
Well, you know, the San Bernardino incident, which, you know, in which several people died. Apparently, this couple went berserk, and they were of Muslim origin or something like that. And any just elementary sort of research that you try to look at an issue and try to find the facts and all that, that looked like a frame-up. It looked like the authorities framed this couple, and it was like a false flag sort of operation. I mean, that's only just looking at the information that I could glean, but all the ingredients of some kind of a, you know, meddling by the authorities and creating a situation which they could blame it on this couple, because there's never been any checking of that.
There's never an investigation.
There's no facts. They are dead, and on we go. So I think you could debate almost every one of those 123. I can't remember the incidences that they're going to, but it's ridiculous. And then you say, well, it's 200,000 deaths?
240,000 Americans murdered in other ways. And look at how the media have taken us and twisted us. And why do they do it? Because behind that smoke screen, the corporations are taking over our country, they're taking over the United States, they're taking over the world.
Then they have a rationale for war and everything.
And that, yeah.
You know, that's so important for people to focus in and really realize that they're being manipulated. I agree. I think there's a huge amount of manipulation going on there.
So, but what can we do about it when the corporations, own not only virtually every newspaper, television station, and radio station in the country, as well as all the top politicians? You know, we are in.
You know, you can go online. You have Amy Goodman. You have some good sources of information, and rely on the good sources because the reporting like that is really bad, you know.
So then the message is, maybe from both of us, be very careful in trusting the corporate media. Go to the other sources. Look elsewhere, and just don't believe the stories. We were going to talk a little bit about what happened at Shawnigan Lake with the dump that has now at least temporarily been closed down. Mm-hmm. So the lake is temporarily at least protected, although the stuff that's already been put there has to be dealt with. So shortly after that happened, and it was almost a month ago, I guess, the decision from the judge, and then the province closed it down. So here was a letter to the editor in the Times Colonist just after the province basically shut down the dump. And the letter says, and I don't fault the person who wrote this at all. I fault the Times columnist for printing it because
Yeah.
it's. The writer says, my mother always told me to give credit where credit is due. So thank you, Environment Minister Mary Polak, for rescinding a permit that never should have been granted. Well, you know, I think we both noticed that Mary Polak was made kind of the hero of the piece.
Yeah.
When I think the truth is very, very different than that. And you said, you know, if she keeps this up, she can be premier. I mean, she was in charge of this file from day one,
Yeah.
allowed it to move ahead. We all know what happened. And then, really, the media gave her a lot of credit for. Anyways.
Well, as you know, we got into a little bit of trouble reporting this story, so ourselves on this show, and you know, but there
Yes,
has
we
been a
did.
ruling. Now the thing is this here. Here's the situation, Jack. The nub of it is engineering firms now can look at projects like the Imperial Metals mine at Mount Poly, and they can go and look at that, look at the situation there, look at the environmental impact, and they can write up a report and approve that you know, development, even though they may have interests in that development. They may have equity interests, like being a partner or having stocks and everything like that in that development, to a point where there's a conflict of interest. And this is what occurred at Shawnigan Lake. The engineering firm did have economic interests in the what should be called contaminated soil, soil contaminated by toxins. And the thing is that that's the crux of it, is that just goes on, where these engineering firms can do that, and that wasn't touched upon in the government's or in the ruling by Justice Robert Sewell. He just touched upon many other aspects of the issue. Now, the government turned down the permit that allows this substances for being buried there, only because the people that own the landfill didn't come up with a security bond or something like that. This is almost a technicality. It's not, it doesn't get into the nub of the issues of you know, how toxic this material is, how close it is to Shawnigan Lake,
How close it is to Souk Lake, which is Victoria's water
which is
supply.
even closer. Our
Yes.
water supply is even closer. Yeah, and they've been shut down almost on a technicality, and of course the owners are appealing. This thing could be up and running again, Jack.
And also, the same thing can happen everywhere in British Columbia.
Yeah.
I mean, that's you know, they did stop this one now, but every quarry in British Columbia can apply to do the same thing and poison the rest of the province. I mean, it's completely crazy.
Well, you know, and the legislation just has to change here. You cannot allow engineering firms to have that much leeway. There has to be some checks and balances.
But the problem is, the only way that can be changed is to change our style of government, because right now the industry runs the government.
Yeah.
So the government says, yeah, you, the company, can hire an engineering firm to do the environmental study, and we, the government, will believe what they say.
We'll rubber stamp it.
I mean, it's how can that make any sense whatsoever? And that's what is now the standard in British Columbia.
Yeah. You know, I could read a couple of things.
Now, this is from what the judge said.
This is what the
in
judge said.
Basically saying,
And there's a whole bunch of things. Let me just see if I can find a pretty good. The judge, Robert Sewell, found that the owners of the landfill and the engineering firm it compromised the integrity of the approval process, and I think he's getting into this issue about what the engineers actually should be doing. And here I underline this. I said, as it stands, if the matter goes back to the Environmental Approval Board, it will arrive with a declaration from the High Court that the project proponents misled the board in the first hearings and misled gave false evidence and concealed information that a supposedly unbiased advisor was partner in the enterprise. See, the landfill owners took efforts to hide the relationship, and they actually, did things that, as a judge says, it looks like they're concealing evidence. So this is probably will go to court again, and these things will be hashed out again. But we're not safe here. We got a little reprieve, from putting more toxins into that landfill, but we have 100,000 tons in there right now, which is a lot of material. And they've been shown not to be able to take care of this properly, and the environment ministry
Can't take care of it. Once it's poisoned, I mean, I think we're at the point where can we say we're doomed? I mean, how do we get out of this disaster? Look at Fukushima. Look at climate change.
Yeah.
Look at the poisoning in Canada from all these mines and the oil industry and the logging industry and the chemical industry and the auto industry. I mean, how much can the planet take from us?
Well, Dr. Hancock was just here, and we're talking about these economic models, and we should be really looking at human development. We should be looking at how to create an
But if we want to look at
society.
human development, we have to retake control of our country. The people who run the country are not good. They don't care about human development. They care about more money and more power, and that's all they care about, and they run the country. So I agree with what Trevor said 100%, but it's not going to happen until...
How are we going to get there is the thing. And I think part of the solution is just simply asking for more. All the voters, all the people that are not going out to the polls, I think you got to get engaged. You got to get back into the game. The other people that are so entrenched and have their positions right now, things are not going to change.
Also, you have to realize how corrupt everything is. I mean, we have to, if we think, which I used to think. I used to think, well, if I vote for this party, it's going to change. And then if I vote for the next party, that will change. But it's not. It's deeper than that. The entire system, our political system, has been corrupted. It's controlled by corporate Canada. They own all. When I say own, I mean they work for them.
We only touched on a couple of things, but I think they're important things for the public to think about. And I think that's the message we're trying to convey, really, is that it's the reason why we're doing this show, is get engaged, think about these issues for real, make demands on these people. There's a lot of corruption going on, but we still have a chance at turning this ship away from the rocks if we really get involved. So that completes Jack and Walt segment, and stay tuned. And Jack's going to be interviewing
Werner
a
Simbeck.
fourth guest.
Welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum. I'd like to start by thanking the volunteer crew and Shaw staff that makes this program possible. Our guest in this segment is Werner Simbeck, and Werner's issue is climate change, which is unfortunately one of the most important issues in the world. So Werner, you said you wanted to start off by talking about the, I guess, impending death of the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah.
Maybe people don't even know what the Great Barrier Reef is.
Well, the Great Barrier Reef is a series of reefs at the northern, well, if you look at Australia, it's the northern section of Australia. It's vast. It's bigger than England. That's how vast it is. You can see it from space. It's considered to be the biggest living organism on Earth, but it's not really an organism. It's just an ecosystem. And that ecosystem has been around for more than 20 million years. And we're going to wreck it. Humans will be the cause of the demise of the greatest reef on Earth.
Now, you said we're going to wreck it, but should you have said we have wrecked it?
Well, yeah, we already have wrecked it, basically. What happened was we had a really strong El Nino with really warm ocean temperatures, and that will destroy, and has already destroyed, a large portion of the reef by bleaching the coral. When the coral goes, the whole reef is gone.
Yeah. And I just noticed that that got less coverage, as far as I know, than the last Canucks game.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, that's
bizarre.
It's,
I mean, the largest living organism.
The death of the Great Barrier Reef doesn't sell anything. People are not excited about that. They're excited about a hockey game, or they're excited about the next stupid thing Trump has done, or whatever other celebrity that we seem to be following. The real issues don't get talked about. And there's a reason for that, because if people were to be told that climate change is going to run out of control within our lifetime, not some event down the road, it's not going to happen like 100 years from now, it's going to happen within our lifetime, you know. The question is, will my child be able to, he's 8 now, will he be able to have children? Not physically, but will there be a society that is safe enough in order to raise a family? Because we're at the brink of destroying everything, right? Everything that we cherish. You know, this endless economic growth that everything seems to be based on needs that the economy gets bigger, you know, more jobs, and that's important, right? But in the process, the capitalism that we have adopted, that endless growth paradigm, the need to grow, is destroying our only planet, our only home, right? We'll cut down the last tree because it'll make a buck, right? So now we're destroying, or we have already destroyed, the Great Barrier Reef, and that's just an example of all the reefs on Earth are in trouble. Reefs are in trouble, especially around the equator, because it's already quite hot there, right? But even here, temperature changes in the oceans will affect the marine life, absolutely. So as the ocean gets a little bit warmer, which it has, if it gets a little bit warmer more so, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia will be history, right? It's something that you can show the Walt Disney movie Nemo to your grandchildren maybe, if you're lucky. Go, yeah, that's what it used to look like. It's basically, that's the idea. The idea is that you will not be able to go there on a vacation trip and go diving and see all those animals that we have.
Well, forget that. I mean,
right?
Our civilization is going to collapse along with the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, that's...
It's an example. It's an example of what we have done. We were destroying something that has been on this earth much longer than we have. We're only been around for about 200,000 years, the Homo sapiens species that we are. Homo erectus and all the other ones, our ancestors only really stretched 2 million years. So from the time we stepped off the tree, you know, and grabbed the first stick, 2 million year history. This thing is 20 million, at least 20 million years old, and we've wrecked it in less than 100 years, basically, of burning all these fossil fuels, which causes climate change. And of course, you'll have now a Republican administration in the United States.
And in Canada.
Oh, okay, well, not quite there yet, but anyways. At least Trudeau doesn't say climate change isn't real. You know, so we have a president who, or no, the whole team denies climate change. All those people around him basically are doing everything to undermine the science, cut the funding of the EPA. We're going to get rid of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. We're going to go back to the 60s, basically, or 50s, really. Yeah. We're going to destroy the Great Lakes because, you know, you can pollute them as much as you like. Nobody will check. Nobody will care. All in the name of profit. The mighty dollar, right? That's what we have. We have the ultimate president now.
But here in Canada, given what can we start to do to, in our own small way, turn this around and try to save ourselves?
I don't think we can, because it's a global system. We can't just individually say, okay, Canada is going to do everything right and we're going to save ourselves. No, we need everybody on board. Everybody has to do their share. The United States is one of the biggest carbon emitters in the world. China is bigger, yeah, but look how big the population is. And we in the Western world have polluted the earth much longer than they have. They just came to the party basically late. But yeah, they'll drive us to the bottom of the ocean basically, if you want to call it that. Ocean levels will rise no matter what we do, right? Even if we stop burning all fossil fuels today, be completely sustainable, the oceans will continue to rise. In fact, they'll be 6 meters by the time it's done, or 7 meters. That's how much we're in for. The only, like, there's no technology available to dial it back to where we were before. You know, we've missed our opportunity. So really, what it is now is basically brace for impact. You know, that's how I see it. There's nothing else we can do. You know, we can try to lessen the impact, basically, make a soft landing maybe, right? But billions of people are going to die. They're going to die because we're going to not have food for everybody. Because when the weather goes crazy, and I think we just have an example of how the weather has been kind of wild in the Midwest, as well as in Ontario, we were just mentioning that
And it's
before.
30 in LA this week. I mean, 30 in LA in
Right.
March.
Yeah, they had we had a really
crazy.
early, in the bottom United States, they had a really early spring, the earliest really ever recorded, really super hot temperatures.
I never heard a word about this,
Yep.
really.
Yeah, and then of course, but really what it means is we're having huge fluctuations in weather. You know, for one moment it could be nice and hot, unseasonably warm, and then it could be cold and wet, unseasonably wet. Right? We could have really strong winters. You know, and people say, "Oh, look,
Oh, it's getting
snowing
colder.
outside.
Yeah,
I made a snowball."
Yeah.
There's no climate change. What are you talking about? No global warming, right? But in reality, the North Pole has not been this warm ever. You know, there's this example that I was just reading on somebody posted. I follow this Arctic emergency group. The ocean in the Arctic, and this one station that measures it where we have data, the average for the last 20 years used to be 0.2 of a degree Celsius, but basically around freezing. It was 14 degrees.
So the average for
The average for the last 20 years,
at this
that
point
where we
in
have data,
yeah,
was basically around freezing.
right.
And salt water doesn't freeze at zero, right? So it must get colder than that. But now it was 14 degrees Celsius.
The same time of year.
The same time of year, yes, in March. 14 degrees Celsius.
The Arctic
The
Ocean.
Arctic Ocean,
14 degrees?
yes. No, soon you can go swimming there.
Yeah.
So the problem, so what happens is, and I think you wanted me to talk about this, so we have ice, we used to have ice in the North Pole, we also have it in the South Pole, right? And it's very unique, and humans have never been on this earth without ice there being, right? This is going to be a new experience for us. Because the ice is disappearing. When the ice melts completely, then that means we're destroying our air conditioning unit of the globe, right? It's going to get hot quickly because there's this phenomena called latent heat of water. You can go look that up and Google it and read up on Wikipedia. And here's the example. If you have 1 gram of ice at 0 degrees Celsius, it takes a certain amount of energy to make that liquid, just to change the phase from solid to liquid
Okay, it's a gram of ice
So-
at 0
yeah.
degrees Celsius. Okay.
at 0 degrees
and
Celsius.
it has
But
to, now it's going to change into water.
it goes from solid to liquid.
Right.
That takes energy,
Right.
a huge amount of energy.
A huge amount of heat coming from the sun.
Well, it takes energy to make that change, that phase
Yes.
change. So then the question is, okay, well, if I reapply that amount of energy, which happens to be 80 calories,
80 calories. 80 calories
80
to
calories.
change 1 gram of ice
to liquid,
to liquid.
still at zero though.
Still at zero.
We
Temperature,
just
okay.
changed the phase,
Okay.
solid to liquid.
Okay, it took
So the
80
question-
grams of energy.
So the question
80
is,
calories of energy.
so the question is, if you reapply 80 calories of energy to that 1 gram of liquid water, how warm will it be?
Yes.
And most people have no clue.
Yes.
I had no clue either.
Yes.
In fact, when I heard this or read this, I didn't believe it. I had to look it up.
Yes.
It's 80 degrees Celsius,
Right.
because that's by definition changing water
So the
by 1 degree.
So the same amount of energy that it's taken, oh my God, to change the ice.
To
Well,
liquid.
they had to warm it up to 0 and then change it into water, which is now happening.
Yes.
That same amount of energy will now raise the temperature of that same amount of water to 8 by 80
I mean, the body of
degrees.
the ocean is quite vast. It's actually, though, unfortunately, it's a
But-
shallow sea,
Yes.
right? But we have 24-hour sunlight
Yes.
in the summertime. So
my
we used to reflect the energy
Yes, yes.
because it used to be covered in snow and ice. But now that energy is no longer reflected, it gets absorbed by the dark ocean. About over 80% of it gets absorbed. So the Arctic will become warm quickly, right? So meaning we're going to see within a few years, less than a decade, we're going to see ice-free Arctic in the summertime.
So
all
people
summer.
should expect increasing variability of climate, and
The weather will go crazy.
and we can't. Our civilization cannot survive that, really.
Growing grain is what keeps us alive,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
rice and grain basically and for us to store the grain for the next year, right? But if the weather becomes so unpredictable that your yields are going greatly down, farmer doesn't know when to plant anymore because when 1 minute it's snowing, next minute it's raining, or too hot.
So that's where we are.
Brace for impact. I don't want to be negative, but unfortunately, if you look at the facts, that's what it says. And if you look at the politics, they all know this. We all went to Paris. The reason why we had all nations, basically the world, sign an agreement in principle that we're going to keep warming of the globe to 2 degrees and ideally to 1.5 degrees Celsius, that means we have to change everything,
And
our
nothing's
practices,
changed. Yeah.
and quickly,
Yeah.
you know.
So
But are we doing it? You know.
every time we start our cars, we're poisoning our children's future. That's what it's come down to.
It's far worse than that.
Far worse than that.
Far worse than that. It's not just driving your car.
No,
It's
it's
eating
not.
meat. It's buying food in the grocery store that's wrapped in plastic that comes from far away.
Yes, but we can change all of those things. We just have to even start. Whether we'll ever start, I don't know, but they are changeable. This is doable as best we can.
It would only be really doable if people were made aware of the consequences of what's looming.
Yes.
Because it is looming. It's just around the corner.
Well, you
We
know,
just-
CFAX Radio, the biggest radio station in Victoria, they have their slogan is, if it's happening, it's here. In other words, the news, we tell it. Well, you've just told the news. You know, you've told something that they will not report because,
well,
you know, they won't report it. So what's going on?
well, it's a predicament. Right? It's not just a problem, it's a predicament. It's a predicament of our species, you know, our development. We've gotten to this point, you know, we're fat and happy up here in the West, you know. You know, we got cars, we got houses, we got food, endless amounts of entertainment channels galore. We're busy, we're happy. Right? That's the trouble. Right? And we're being kept busy
Yeah, and happy.
and fat, really, right?
Yeah.
Because nobody really truly explains what's at stake,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Well, when you hear, climate conference, yeah, those scientists, yeah, they don't know anything, right? Oh, the weather changes all the time. Oh, it's been cold before or warm or whatever.
And Werner, we're going to have to let it stop there. But everything he's saying is absolutely right. This is the disaster we faced. Werner, thank you so much for saying it.
Thanks for having me.
Yikes.